Hey, what's up YouTube? My name is Brett, and today I'm going to show you guys how to use the Google provider inside of Next Auth, so you could take that user and then store that user inside of a MongoDB database using Mongoose. Okay, so let's just jump right into the coding. So what I did here was I opened up my terminal on my computer and I created a Next app at latest, which is a Next.js 13 application. As you can see, that's what I answered for all the questions that it asks when you create a project. And then it just initializes the project, installs the dependencies, and then it creates this boilerplate Next.js 13 application. So now we're here and we have an app folder. And the first thing I want to do when we want to use Next Auth and MongoDB is I like creating the database first, so we have that out of the way. So like we said in the title, we are using MongoDB. So all you have to do is go to your browser, go to google.com. You could type in MongoDB. And then it should be the first option. And then after that, you're going to sign in. You could either sign in with your Google account, your GitHub account, or with an email address. I'm just going to use my Google. And then after you sign in, you should be on a page something similar to this. And you could create your database by either clicking the right here that says create, or you could go right here to the top left where all of your projects are and then click new project. And then after you click new project, we have to give the project a name. So what we could do here is we could just do Next Auth and MongoDB. So after that is done, we will click create project. And then it is going to ask you to build a database. So we're going to build a database and we are going to use the free version. And this is for learning and exploring MongoDB in a cloud environment. We are going to use the AWS provider. Your region, it should be whatever the recommended region is with a star. And then your cluster name really doesn't matter, but it says you cannot change the name of the cluster once it's created. We will keep it as is, which is cluster 0. So then you click create here at the bottom. And then we have to have a username and password. So this step is very important. This is how we're going to be able to connect the URI to our application. So I'm just going to put the username as bwestwood11. You could do whatever name you want. I'll keep the auto-generated password that they gave me. I'm going to copy it and then store it in my notepad so I have it for later. So here it is. And then when you click create user, it's going to hide your password. So don't click it until you actually know what your password is. So after you do that, as you can see, we created username and username and password. Now we are just going to use the local environment, and then you could add your IP address right here, or you could put 0.0.0.0/0. I will write that on the screen so you guys could do that, and that means you could use this database from any IP address. So after you do that, we click finish and close, go to databases, and ours was instant. Our database was created instantly because we see the green right here that says status is active. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, but other than that, you have successfully created your MongoDB database for use. And to connect it, all we're going to do is we could go to the connect here. We go to our drivers, which is the first option, and then it says we need to install our driver, which is MongoDB. And then we have to add the connection string into our application code. So let's copy this application string, or you can just press copy here. And then we are just going to minimize this page. Now we are on our code. Let's create on the root layout of the whole code a .env.local. So this is where we're going to keep our environment variables. We can name this Mongo _URI equals, and then you paste your code that you just had. This is the connection string. And then where it says password right here, we have to replace that password with the password that we got inside of the username and password we created. So in that notepad that I saved, we could take this password and then paste it in right here. So now we replace that password with password, and now we have a connection string that now we could actually connect MongoDB to our application. Let's install a few packages that we need to install to ensure the process works. So I'm going to open up my terminal down here, and we're going to say npm install. And the first package to get out of the way is Next.Auth. That's allowing us to use Next Auth. Next one will be Mongoose. This is going to allow us to connect MongoDB to our actual application. And then we're going to install MongoDB, which is the driver allowing us to use that URI right here on the screen. So we are going to press enter. And then if you want to see the versions I have for the specific project, I'll go my package JSON, and I have version 5.6 for MongoDB, 7.3.1 for Mongoose, and version 4.22.1 for Next Auth. So all of them successfully have downloaded. Now let's make a file that allows Mongoose to make this connection to our application. So to do that, inside of the root, we can create another folder, and we will call this utils. And then inside, I like creating a file called database.js. You could name it db.js. That's short for database, but I just like typing out the full word. We're going to import the package Mongoose from Mongoose. And we are just going to have a function in here that we're going to export. So we're going to say export const. And we could call this whatever we want. We could say connect DB, so database. This is going to be an asynchronous function. And inside of this, we could have a try catch block. So as you can see, this auto completion code for me, this is GitHub Copilot. I know I've had a few people ask me what it is. So if you're wondering, that's what it is. You can search GitHub Copilot. It's about $10 a month. And I think it's worth it for sure. So right here, we just have a try catch block, and inside of the try, we are going to await a Mongoose connection, and we have to await it because it is asynchronous and it will take time. And we are going to be able to access the environment variables by saying process.env mongo _URI. And then we could pass a few options if we want. And as you can see, my GitHub Copilot is telling me recommendations that I could do. So we could do a use URL parser, true. We could use unified topology as true. And we could create a database name. So database name, and this was what's going to show up inside of our database, the name. And we could just say user. You could just do user DB, whatever you want. I'm just going to say user. So that's going to be our database name right there. And then if that connection works, let's just do a console.log saying MongoDB connected. And then if we get an error, let's just console log the error. Console log the error. Okay. So we have this, and now all we have to do is we are actually exporting it. So now we could use this file anywhere inside that we want to connect to our database just by calling the connectdb function. Now I want to quickly test out to make sure our connection to MongoDB is actually working. So to do that, we have to actually invoke this function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the page.js inside of the root file of the app, which is the home page. I'm going to remove everything inside of the return. We could just put a section tag, and then inside of it, we could just say h1 at homepage. And then what I want to do is I am going to remove this import of image, mark this as a used client just for now. And then I am going to import connectdb from that utils folder inside the database file. And then we could just say constdb equals connectdb. And then what we could do here is if your server isn't running, you say npm run dev, npm run dev. And then when you open up localhost 3000, like I just did, control click localhost 3000, we should get a message in the server right here in the console that says MongoDB connected. Because if it didn't connect inside, we'll get the catch error, and it'll be the console.log error instead of MongoDB connected. So our MongoDB connection string is working, and everything is good to go. Now we need to create a user schema. So this is a model that allows us to define the types that we're going to send to our database and what the property names are going to be. So to do that, we create another folder inside of the root called models, like that. And then the file inside of that should just be the name of the model you're creating to keep everything pretty consistent. So ours could be user.js, doesn't have to be JSX. And inside of this, like I said, we are defining the types and we have to import a few things. So the things we have to import are, in curly braces, the schema, the model, and the models. And this is going to be from Mongoose, just like that. So what we are going to do here is we are going to say user schema. We could do this capitals, user schema. And it's going to equal a new schema. And it's going to pass through an object. And inside of this object, we are going to define the properties and the types that we're going to send back to MongoDB database. So the first one we can have will be email. And actually, before I even do this, I want to show you exactly why I am doing these properties. So I'm not even going to do the schema yet. Let's start working on the Next Auth. So to do that, the reason why I'm doing the Next Auth, like I said, I want to show you the properties and why I'm passing these properties into this user schema. So to create your Next Auth and start your Next Auth, you can watch my full tutorial on the ultimate guide of Next Auth. I will link it up at the top so you guys could click that and go to that video. Other than that, we are going to create a folder inside of app called API. And then inside of that folder, we're going to have another folder called auth. And then inside of that folder, we're going to have a catch-all folder, which is going to be Next Auth in brackets. And it's dot 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 next auth in brackets. And then we have a route.js file. And then inside of this is our entry code into Next Auth. So this is how we're connecting Next Auth. So we have to import Next Auth from /next, as you see at the top, and then we must import the provider we want to use as well. So we're going to say Google provider, and it's from next-auth /providers/Google. And then we will also be importing our user schema model, and we have to import the database connection because we have to connect to the database every time we run a function for Mongoose or MongoDB. Okay, so we're going to add one more import later, but those three are good for now. So we have to define a handler, and this handler is going to equal Next Auth object. And we're going to pass in a few options into the Next Auth function right here. So the first one is going to be the providers. We have to say what providers we're using. So we're using the Google provider, and then it's going to pass in a few options, and it's going to pass in the client ID and the client secret. So what I could do here is we could copy this Google ID, put it in the .env local, and we are going to paste because we're going to get a value for that. We go back to our route, and we have a Google secret as well. And we're going to copy. We're going to go back in the env local, and then we're going to have a Google secret as well. And you can put equal signs and equal signs. And what we could do here next is we can actually go inside of the Google Cloud Console and get those specific values, which is the client ID and client secret. So on Google, all you have to do is type in Google Cloud Console. Inside, it should be the first option. And then when you should land on a page like this, and if you don't, it's because you're not logged into your Gmail account, which I am here at the top. And what you can do here is you can go click this button. It's like a down click, and you could click New Project. And then we can name the project wherever we want. We can name this Next Auth Video Tut. You could keep the organization as is, no organization. And then it is going to create the project here. As you can see, it's loading. And then if you're inside of the project, you will know because whatever you named it, it should be popping up right here. So I'm going to click select project, and as you can see, there's my project. We are going to go to API and services. Inside of API and services, the first screen we want is the OAuth consent screen. This allows us to use the Google services to log into our Google account, and so we don't have to create a username and password. So we're going to click the OAuth consent screen. You could click external because this allows any user to test with a Google account. We need an app name. What we can name it here is we can name it anything we want. We can name it like test. Our support email is going to be dabrettwestwood@gmail.com. That's my email. And then you have to do your email again down here. And then we're just going to click save and continue. You don't need to fill out any of the other fields. And you could always come back to these options to fill them out. We're going to add 3 scopes. We're going to add the first 3. 1, 2, 3. Click update. And then we don't need any test users, so we're going to click save and continue. And then it's just a summary of everything you did. So after that, we are set with the OAuth consent screen. And now we need the credentials. So the credentials allows us to actually use the OAuth consent string, and it gives us these values that we're looking for. So we are going to create credentials for the OAuth client ID. What we're going to do is we're going to click web application. I'm just going to keep the name as web client 1. You should change it. And then we have authorized redirect URI, and this has to be localhost 3000 /API/auth/callback/Google. And then if you're using a different provider, you just replace Google with whatever provider you're using. And obviously, if you're not using Google, you're not going to be using this specific service of Google Cloud. So this should be the specific redirect URI that you need to use. And if you don't, you're going to get an error thrown at you. So we're going to click create. And after we click that, we get the client ID and the client secret. And that's what we need. So we're going to copy the client ID, go back to our project, and we're going to paste the ID there. And then we're going to go back and we're going to get the secret. We're going to go back to the project, and then we're going to paste the secret here. Perfect. So now we have our values, and we are done with the Google Cloud Console. So what we could do here is we could just close this up, and we could leave the MongoDB database up, and we can minimize it. Go back into our code editor, and let's go back to our catch-all route, which is this Google provider. So now we said that we are using the Google provider, and then after that, an option that we're going to use is we are going to use callbacks. So if you look at the docs of Next Auth, these are pretty much asynchronous functions that allow us to do a certain reaction or interaction when a specific callback is called. So we are going to be using 2 of them. And the first one we are going to use is the session. So it's like that, and it is passing in the session as a param. And then for now, we are just going to return the session, because we'll work on this code in a little bit because we have to finish a few other things up. So after that, we have a comma after this, and the other callback function we are doing is the sign in, like that. And then we are passing in the profile. So the profile, we're passing in as a param so we can access it inside of this sign in function. And the profile is going to be the Google profile of whatever account you log into. So I'll show you exactly the properties that we get from the profile. So what we can do here is we can console log the profile so you can see what it is when we actually log in. So I'll have that for now. And then what we are going to have here is we can have we are going to await the connect DB because we have to actually connect to the database. And then what we could do here is we could check to see if the user exists in the database. And then if not, we're going to have to create a new user in the database. So what we could do here is I want to show you the properties before we even continue. So this is going to return true, because if it returns true, that means it was successful. And if it returns false, that means it's not successful. So what we can do here is right above this, we could add a try catch, because we do want to return false, because that would actually give us an error message. So I'm going to put this inside the try, and then we'll have a catch error, and then we'll have a console log of error returning false. Okay, we will come back to this code right here, but like I said, I want us to actually log in to the Google provider and show you exactly how the profile properties and parameters look. So what I'm going to do here is first I'm going to go in the global CSS, remove lines 5 through 27, make it look a lot cleaner. We will go inside of the page.js, which is the home page, remove this connection and the use client that we just did earlier. And what we are going to do here is we can actually keep this as a use client, because we're going to have to actually access the use session hook. So we're going to have the use session hook, which is going to allow us to actually see the session of the user and make sure we're logged in. And this is from /React. We are also going to have the sign in function, which allows us to sign in. And then we're going to have the sign out as well, because we do want to sign out. And so the sign in and sign out functions are very easy to use. What we can have here is we could have an H2 that says sign in with Google. And then below that, we could have a button that says sign in. And the button is going to have an on click with the anonymous function that is going to have the sign in function like that. And then we are going to pass in a string called Google, because that is the ID of what we're trying to log in with, which is Google. If it's GitHub, you're going to put GitHub. If it's credentials, you'll put credentials. If it's whatever the provider is, that is the name you'll put inside of a string. So what we could do here is we have, we're not tracking the session yet, which is not a big deal. We're going to sign in with Google. And then when we sign in, it should call these callback functions here. And we should be able to get the profile, and we're going to console log the profile. And the console log should pop up inside of our VS Code editor, since it is a server-side page. So I'm going to move localhost 3000 over. We are going to click sign in with Google, and it should redirect us to a OAuth consent string, which allows us to log in with our Google accounts. And if that doesn't work, we could obviously troubleshoot it. So we click sign in, and it says there is an error. So we do have some errors here. There is no HTTP methods exported inside of our catch-all route. So that would help. So we do, inside of the route, I actually didn't finish it all. I was pretty much jumping the gun there. And what we have to do is we have to export the handler, because we have no access to it. And the way you export this handler, since it is a catch-all, is we are exporting the handler as a GET request and the handler as a POST request, because those are the two HTTP methods that this specific catch-all route uses. Okay, so now let's try it again. So we're going to go to localhost 3000. Nothing is styled here. Like you see, it's pretty bland. So we're going to click sign in, which is technically a button. And as you can see, it redirects us to this OAuth consent string. I'm going to press my Google account. And then we are back to the home page. Perfect. So now I'm going to go back to our console log right here inside of our server. And as you can see, here is our profile. And our profile has a bunch of different properties like email, name, picture, family underscore name, given underscore name. We have the email underscore verified true. We have an issued at, an expiration token, and we have saying MongoDB is connected. So this is what we're going to have to do. We are going to have to now create that user schema that I was talking about, because inside of the user schema, we are going to get some of these properties, because we want to get these properties and then store them in a database to keep that user secured in our database. So the properties we want to pass to our database from the profile, the Google profile that you see here, is going to be the email, which is my email right here. We want to pass in the name, and then we also want to pass in the picture, because the picture is going to be, it could be used as an avatar if you have a user logging into a specific application on your project. So those are going to be the 3 properties that we're going to get. So what we can do here is I'm going to minimize the terminal real quick. And inside the models and then the user.js, we can actually start completing the schema, so we can say the types and the properties we want to our database. So we're going to call this a user schema, and it's going to equal a new schema. And then, like I said, it's going to pass in objects with a few properties. And the properties are going to be the profile props that we saw just right now. So the first one's going to be email, and the type is going to be a string. And we will have it as unique because we only want 1 email per account. That is going to be our unique identifier, also with the ID. So we're going to have true. That has to be unique. And then we could have a string that says email already exists if it becomes false. Another one is we could have it required as true, and then we could say email is required. So that is our email schema right there, property, inside of the user schema. Now we're going to have a name, and the name is going to be like that Brett Westwood. And we're going to have a type as a string, and it's going to be required true, and then it's going to say the name is required if it's false. We're going to have another comma, and we're going to have the image. In the image, it is all it is a string, like a JPEG. So whatever the full URL is, .jpeg, .png, whatever the image is, it's a string. So now let's close this schema by going like this, semicolon, and then we are going to say const user, and this is going to create a models.user. Well, no, this is going to store the user inside of the models.user, or if there is no models.user, then we are going to create a user model using the user schema function up there. So that's what this line of code means. So we're going to create the models.user using the second parameter right here, or we're just going to store it in the models.user if it already exists. And then we just have to export default the user. Okay, so now we can start using methods that Mongoose allows us to use all throughout our application because we exported this file. So now we want to go inside of our route, and at the top we are going to import, what did I name it, user with the capital U, from @/models/user. And now we could actually start using methods to create users, to find them in our database, and et cetera, et cetera. So what we are going to do is, first we can actually work on the sign-in asynchronous function here. So we console log the profile, and that's what we got earlier. So after we console log it inside of the try, we are connecting to the database with this line of code. Then next we can say const user exist equals await, and then we're using the method user.find1, and like I said, we are going to look for the email. So the email, we're going to have to use the profile that we're passing into this function. So it's going to be profile.email, just like that. So now if we find one of these, that means we have a user and the user exists, and we're just going to store it in this variable. And then if the user doesn't exist, we're going to say if the user doesn't exist, we're going to create a new user. So we're going to say user equals await, and then it's a user.create. And then we're going to get the email. And all of these properties here on the left of the semicolon, they have to match up with your schema. So they have to be email, name, and image. And then, like I said, we are getting the email, name, and image from the profile object right here. So this is going to be profile.email, which is that Google email. Next one is going to be name. So it's going to be profile.name. And then the image is going to be profile.picture. Reason why is if you see right here, the property is called picture and not image, and it gives us that string right there. So that's why it's profile.picture. We're going to close the user, and then we are going to close this again. And then we return true up here. Just making the code a little cleaner. There we go. And then we could keep the catch section the same. Everything is good to go. And now we can actually test out to make sure we are sending a user to our database inside of the user models. So we tested out that our Google sign-in works because we wouldn't have gotten this information from the profile if it didn't. Now we are going to test out to see if the storing in the database works. So what we are going to do here is I am going to go back into the home page real quick, and I'm going to add another button because I want us to be able to sign out so we can test this out. So we're going to say sign out with a capital O. We're not passing anything into the sign out function from Next Auth. And what we're going to do here is instead of sign in, it's called sign out. And then we're just going to sign out. You're not going to be able to tell you signed out unless you console log a few things. But we are technically signed out now. And what I want to do is I want to open up that MongoDB database. So I'm going to drag it here. And we are going to sign back in. And we should be able to send this Google provider profile to our database. So we're clicking sign in. We're signing in with our Google provider. Click DA Brett Westwood. And now let's check our database. So I would refresh the database. And then we could browse the collection. And then we have a user with the user. And as you can see, we have those properties we defined in our schema in here. And we matched it up with the profile properties. So we have my email, name, and image. So that is how you successfully push a user from the Next Auth Google provider into your MongoDB database. And the final step is I want to show and attach an ID to that user, because it could be very useful to have an ID on a user, because using dynamic data, you do want to make sure you find a unique property. You can use the email, but a lot of people like using ID, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you go back inside of your route, which is your catch-all route, and inside of the callback, and then inside of the session asynchronous function, we are going to, right above the return session, we are going to start writing some code. So we're going to call a session user, and this is going to be await, and we're going to do user.find1, and we're going to get the session.user.email. And you want to know why I'm using session.user.email? I will show you, because I feel like a lot of people don't show the properties, and people could get confused because you might just push session.email and you'll get an error. So let's go to our home page and let's use the use session hook now. So to use the use session hook is the easiest way to get session data and show it in the front end. So all you have to do is pass in a curly brace, and we're getting the data, but we're just going to rename it as session. And then what we can do here is we can console.log the session so we can see what it is. And I am actually getting an error because before you can actually use the use session hook, you have to wrap the whole application in a provider. So we have to create a new folder called components. And inside of components, I'm going to have a new file called provider.jsx. And what we can do here is we can define the provider. And you can define the provider in the layout JS file, which wraps the whole application on the root layout. But it is a used client file, and you want to keep your layout as a server-side rendered page. So that's why I'm creating the provider in a separate file, because I'm going to mark this as a used client. And then what I'm going to do here is I am going to import the session provider. And this is going to be from Next.Auth/React. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say const provider is going to take in the children and is also going to take in the session. And what we're going to do here is we are going to have a return. Inside of the return, we're going to wrap everything in the session provider and passing in the session as well, as you see there. We're going to wrap all the children, and then we're going to close the session provider. Let's end these curly brace off, and then let's export this file as well. Export default provider. Now we can go inside the layout.js, and we can import that at the top. So we're going to import provider from add components /provider. Then we are just going to wrap all the children with that as well. So now we could use that use session hook. So provider, wrapping it like that, and we could just put the children right in between. And now we wrapped our whole application with the session provider, allowing us to use the use session hook, which is right here. And we are going to get the session inside of our client-side console. So I'm going to open up localhost 3000 again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh the page. We should be signed in. I'm going to console log. And I'm going to make this a little bigger. And as you see, we get an object. And in the object, we get an expires. And then we get a user. And then with the email, image, and name. So we get those three properties. And then inside of the three properties that's surrounding it, we have a user. So as you can see here inside of our route, that's why it's session.user.email. Because if you look at the console, that is the way it's set up, and that is how you'll be able to access the email. So we are going to find a unique user inside of our database. This is what we're saying here with that specific user, that email, and then we're going to store it inside of the session user. So now we have access to the user that's logged in, and all we are going to do is we're going to say session.user.id, and it's going to equal the session user._ID. And the reason why it's ._ID is because if you go to the database in MongoDB, that is how they define their IDs in there. And then we're just storing inside of this session.user.id. So now if we save this, I might have to sign out, but let me refresh this page, go back, and then let's see the properties. And as you can see now, I added the ID now to our session provider. So now we could use the ID if we need to. And this ID right here is going to match up to the ID inside of your MongoDB database. And then you could click sign out. And as you can see here, it says undefined and null. So now our Google provider is working. We're able to send our user to our MongoDB database, and we're able to successfully pretty much extract all of the properties we need to use them in a useful way for our application. So if you have any questions or anything was very confusing, leave a comment down below this video and I'll come help you. Also, we do have a Discord, so if you do want to join that, I'm going to have the link in the description as well. I do usually answer comments within 24 hours or less. And I do have a lot of other videos about Next.js, Next Auth, session providers, Stripe, whatever you need that's front end, back end, React, you should subscribe to this channel. and also like this video for more content like this. Other than that, have a good day and happy coding.